we're back again.
Hi, everybody.
Beautiful May day today, spring day, May 11th.
Gorgeous.
Beautiful weather out there, yeah.
Sure is, Joe.
So, hope you're enjoying it.
I am.
Before, well, at least here in Yuma, before it gets too hot.
Yeah.
We are in the book of Exodus. And a lot of times as Christians, hear people, they talk like the Old Testament's not that important, that it's the New Testament. Of course, certainly we live under the New Testament, and the New Testament is important, but we can learn so many things from the Old Testament. And of course, one thing you see is that people haven't changed much. Situations change. I mean, it's a whole different world as far as the way the world works now, but people haven't changed.
Human nature doesn't change.
Human nature doesn't change. And just thinking, in the last chapter we just studied, or maybe it was chapter 5, a couple of chapters back anyway, when Moses came and told them that God told the Israelites that God said that he was going to deliver them and set them free from their slavery. Of course, they got all excited, which you can't blame them for. But then, when Pharaoh refused to listen to Moses and he made the people work even harder, told them, listen, you got to make the same number of bricks, but we're not supplying you the straw anymore. You got to send some of your people out to get straw. So now they got the same quota they have to reach with less people to do it, because you got people out doing other tasks. And what happens? They get upset with Moses and start complaining and griping and said, things were better off before. And same thing happens sometimes with Christians. We get saved, we get excited and we think, oh, this is so wonderful. Now I'm born again. And then problems come along. Maybe friends reject you. Maybe situations in your family. Who knows? And all of a sudden we start thinking, well, maybe things weren't so bad after all. Maybe I should have go back the way I was. And
life is full of problems.
There's always going to be problems. There's always going to be challenges. But when God makes a promise, He's going to fulfill it.
That's
just because
right,
things may get a little more difficult. Once we begin to obey God, doesn't mean that He's not going to fulfill His promises.
That's right.
And certainly the situation did get a little bit worse for the Israelites for a while, but it's all in God's plan. God's got things under control.
Yes, He does.
So thank God for that. God's always got things under control. Sometimes we don't, but God does.
God does. No problem with God.
All right, well, let's go on here. We ended up the end of chapter 6, so I guess we'll go to chapter 7. And I'll just read the first few verses there. It says, then the Lord said to Moses, this was right after Moses said some things to God. He was complaining just like the other people, and but God's reassuring him. Said, the Lord said to Moses, see, I've made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. You're to say everything I command you, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his country. So Aaron was sort of Moses' mouthpiece. He was the one that did the speaking, because Moses, of course, was complaining because he didn't speak very good. And I think we've mentioned this, but some Bible scholars say that he probably stuttered. But whatever the situation was, he didn't feel like he could speak very good. So he said, let's let Aaron do it. Let Aaron... I'll tell Aaron what to do. Aaron will speak to Pharaoh. So Moses becomes like God to Pharaoh, and Aaron will be like his prophet, speaking what he speaks. And he says, your brother Aaron's to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his country. Verse 3, but I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. Now, I know a lot of people have problems with that too. Well, why would God harden his heart? Well, I think, first of all, Pharaoh had already hardened his heart. Pharaoh had already told them they couldn't go, and he had already increased their workload and made them go get their own straw, so they had to work twice as hard, and they were beating them if they weren't meeting their quota. So his heart was already hardened. And I think God just said, all right, you want to harden your heart? I'll just harden it even more. Harden it to the point where you won't even respond when I send all these plagues on you. Because normally you would think that after about 3 or 4 of these plagues that we're going to be talking about here in a minute, after 3 or 4 of those, he'd be
got their attention.
Right. You'd think he'd be saying, "Look, get out of here. I don't want to see your face anymore." But so that God could show not only to the Egyptians but to countries around them. And again, I may have mentioned this before, but if you've read the book of Joshua, when they went into Jericho, they actually sent some spies in, and they were hidden by Rahab. And Rahab made the comment that our hearts melted with fear because of the things that we've heard about you. And of course, some of it was the things that happened the 40 years in the wilderness when they defeated other armies, but I'm sure some of it was about the plagues that came on Egypt, because Canaan, the land they were going to, was not all that far from Egypt. It was right next door. So I'm sure they heard all these stories about these plagues that came upon Egypt, and they knew that there was something about these Israelites. They weren't like everybody else.
That's right.
They had God on their side. And he says, and goes on and says, this is verse 4, then I'll lay my hand on Egypt, and with mighty acts of judgment I'll bring out my divisions, my people, the Israelites, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it. He wanted the Egyptians to know that he was in charge of it. These just weren't coincidences. You know, maybe once or twice Moses said something about what was going to happen. Maybe you might believe once or twice it's just coincidence, but after 4, 5, 6 times, there was no doubt.
No doubt.
When Moses said, tomorrow there's going to be this, and tomorrow there was that, and then when Moses said, okay, tomorrow we'll take it away, or today we'll take it away, and it ceased to be, the plague ceased, why, after a few of those, you get the idea that somebody besides Moses was behind all this. Moses wasn't that powerful.
Much greater power.
So anyway, God told Moses and Aaron that when he says in verse 8, then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, then say to Aaron, take your staff, throw it down before Pharaoh, and it become a snake. So they did as they commanded. Well, Pharaoh then commanded some of his wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians, did the same thing by their secret arts. And again, I don't know whether this was just sleight of hand, or they may have possibly had some supernatural power from the enemy, because the devil does have some supernatural powers. And they threw down their staffs, and they became snakes also. But Aaron's snake ate up all their snakes. That shows who was in charge here. But Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord said. So now we start with the first plague, and that is turning the water to blood.
That's right.
And he says it in verse, where are we at here? Verse 16. God speaking again to Moses, and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to say to you, let my people go so they may worship me in the wilderness. But until now you have not listened. And this is what the Lord says, by this you will know that I am the Lord. With the staff that's in my hand, I will strike the waters of the Nile, and will be changed into blood. The fish in the Nile will die, the river will stink, the Egyptians will not be able to drink its water. And so God said to Moses, tell Aaron Take your staff, stretch it out over the waters of Egypt, over the streams, the canals, the ponds, the reservoirs, the rivers, and all turn to blood. And of course, fish can't live in blood. They have to have water. So what are
polluted?
Yeah, and all the fish die, so it begins to stink.
Yeah.
But you can't live on drinking blood either. You got to have water. And to me, it was kind of like God was going right for the jugular, because first of all, they worship the Nile River, but also water is essential for life. You know, you can live 5 minutes without oxygen, so that's probably the most essential thing for life. But the second most essential thing is water. You can't live very long. I mean, you can live maybe a few days depending on the temperature and how active you are and so forth without water, but you can't go very long. And you go 1 day without water, you're feeling it. Wow. It's making a difference in your body. You can tell that you're lacking something. And so they turned all the water into blood. But he says in verse 22, it says, but the Egyptian magicians did the same thing by their secret arts. And Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord said. I'm thinking, why? I mean, sure, they reproduced it, but if they had any kind of power, why couldn't they reverse it? I mean, they already had the water turned into blood, so they turned a little bit more water into blood. The magicians.
Oh, the magicians.
I'm thinking, that's not what I would want. If I was Pharaoh, I'd say, hey, I want you guys to reverse this, not make more blood.
Yeah.
Turn it the other way. But they didn't have the power to do that.
No.
What God does, people can't undo, just like it says in Revelation. The doors God opens, nobody can close, and the doors God shuts, nobody can open. So they didn't have the power to reverse it. They through their magic powers, their sleight of hand, whatever, they could turn a little water into blood, but they couldn't reverse it. And it says, and all the Egyptians dug along the Nile to get drinking water because they could not drink the water of the river. So apparently the groundwater wasn't affected. So to get water, they had to dig down and get water out of the ground. Yeah. So there was some water. So they didn't all die, but it's a lot of work to do all that digging when before all you had to do is scoop the water out of the river, out of the reservoir, or whatever source you used. But now it's all blood, and it doesn't. It's not drinkable. And I was reading through this, I was thinking too, there's probably some symbolism here because if you remember right, Moses was put into the Nile River. Of course, he was put in a basket, but Pharaoh had commanded all the Israelite boys to be cast into the river. It's kind of like he was throwing the blood into the river, the blood of the Israelites into the river, because he was afraid of Israel getting too powerful.
That's an interesting idea.
And so now it's like God said, okay, you want blood in the river? Here, I'll turn the whole river blood for you.
Yeah.
Whether that's God's reasoning in that, I don't know. But I just feel like there may be some symbolism. You wanted to fill the Nile with the blood of the Hebrews? Here, I'll fill it with blood for you. Anyway, everything turns to blood. They have to dig for water and all the things that are going on, but still no change of heart of Pharaoh. So let's go on into chapter 8. 7 days after the Lord struck the Nile, the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and said again, let my people go so they can worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I'll send a plague of frogs on your whole country. The Nile will teem with frogs.
Now, here we go.
They'll come up into your palace and your bedrooms and your beds and the houses of your officials and on your people and in your ovens and kneading troughs. The frogs will come on you and your people and all your officials. Well, apparently the blood turned back into water, because now there's frogs coming up out of the Nile. But I mean, not just a few. It's just like a horde of frogs. Just covered with frogs.
That's a lot of croaking going on.
That's true. That would
really
be noisy too, as far in addition to the mess and everything.
Yeah.
But you go to bed at night, you gotta shoo the frogs out of your bed, and even then, you go to bed and in the middle of the night, frogs are jumping on your head and feel something crawling under the covers, another frog, and you go to bake and open up the flour bin, and there's the frogs sitting in it. You go to start a fire in the oven, and there's frogs in there. Wherever you go, there's frogs. When you're walking, there's frogs. And, as they're going down the street in their chariots, they're probably scrunching frogs, or they're dead frogs. Well, I just want you to get a picture of what it's like. Very, very graphic. I mean, frogs are
everywhere.
Yeah, they're not cute little cuddly creatures. They're slimy and they're messy, and they leave messes wherever they go, and now you're covered with them. Yeah, they become a curse.
Yeah.
I don't know if these were frogs that you could eat, but there were so many of them, even if they were eating them, why, they couldn't get rid of all of them. And so there's frogs everywhere. And it says, verse 7, the magicians did the same thing by their secret arts. They made frogs come up on the land of Egypt. Now, how they knew that those were frogs they created, I don't know. How they know they were just frogs that already come. But even if they could, again, why make more frogs? We got enough frogs. Again, if I was Pharaoh, I'd say, no, don't make more frogs. We got enough frogs. Get rid of the frogs. But then again, the magicians couldn't do that. All they could do, seemingly, was create a few more frogs. And that's, to me, kind of counterproductive. So, anyway, Pharaoh, doesn't take him long to call Moses and Aaron and say, pray to the Lord. Verse 8, pray to the Lord to take the frogs away from me and my people, and then I'll let your people go to offer sacrifices to the Lord. This is an interesting couple of verses here now, I think. It says, Moses said to Pharaoh, I leave to you the honor of setting the time for me to pray for you and your officials and your people, that you and your houses may be rid of the frogs, except for those that remain in the Nile. So it's almost like Moses saying, I'm going to give you a little, let you think you have a little bit of authority here. You tell me when you want to get rid of these frogs. Now, what would you say? What would you say if somebody told you, your house was full of frogs, and somebody said, well, I can get rid of these for you. You just tell me when you want to get rid of them.
I'd say now.
Yeah, I think any sane person would say, now, get these frogs out of here, now.
Yeah.
But what was Pharaoh's answer?
He said, tomorrow. He must have liked sleeping with them. I don't know.
There was years ago, and I don't even remember who originally preached this sermon, but there was a sermon called One More Night with the Frogs, and a number of preachers have preached that sermon since then. But why would anybody want to spend one more night with the frogs? And of course, the whole concept or the whole thought of that sermon, One More Night with the Frogs, was people do the same thing sometimes. They hear the word and God begins to bring conviction, but it's like, well, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready to quit my sin. I'm not ready to give up my old life. I'm not ready, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. one more night with the frogs.
To give up my habit of whatever.
Yeah, to give up my habits or my sin or my problems or whatever it is.
Or whatever.
You know, I can do that when I'm older. I want to enjoy my sin right now. You know, and same thing, you know, even if you're already a Christian, but there's things in your life you know you need to get rid of. Habits, maybe there's things that you're doing that's affecting your relationship with your family or affecting your relationship with your people you work with, and you know you got to change that someday, but not today.
Not today.
Not today. Or a lot of times where they got habits, well, just one more time and I'll quit tomorrow. I'll start my diet tomorrow. I'll quit smoking tomorrow. I'll quit drinking tomorrow. Just one more night with the frogs. What did Jesus say? Well, I guess it wasn't Jesus. It was Paul that said, 2 Corinthians 6:2 says, now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation. Don't wait. If you know you got to change, if you know you got a sin that you need to get rid of, today's the day to start working on it. Now, I know sometimes we struggle, even after we make that commitment. It doesn't mean that we're automatically going to get over it right away, but at least we make that effort.
Yeah.
Make that effort today, not tomorrow, not next week, but today. Let's get rid of those frogs today. So, Moses does what Pharaoh says, what Pharaoh asks. He waits till the next day. The next day, he says, well, Moses replied, verse 10, Moses replied, it'll be as you say, so that you may know that there's no one like the Lord our God. The frogs will leave you in your houses, your officials and your people. They will remain only in the Nile. So the next day, Moses reversed the curse.
Yep.
Only thing was, all the frogs didn't just go back into the Nile. They just all died. So now they got another problem. They got millions of dead frogs piled up.
Goodness.
And they start to stink. And now you got that mess to deal with.
Yeah.
Dead frogs everywhere. And yet, Pharaoh refuses to relent. He hardens his heart again and says, I'm not gonna let you go.
Do it.
But again, when we got a problem in our life, a sin in our life, the best time to deal with it is right now.
Yeah.
You know, the more you sin, the more you continue to sin, the easier it gets to sin, and the harder it is to break that habit. The best time, like I say, to respond to God's mercy is right now.
Yeah.
Just do it now. Anyway, he reverses the plague of the frogs. Again, Pharaoh hardens his heart. So now we get the next plague. Most Bibles, most of the more modern versions say gnats. In the King James, it says lice. Some of these words, the ancient Hebrew words, there's some controversy in exactly what they mean. But either one, I mean, if you got lice, those things crawl on your skin. They cause itching and scaling and rashes. And if it's gnats, they get so thick. I don't know, those of you who live here in Yuma may remember how bad gnats used to be out on the mesa when we had so much citrus. There'd be clouds of gnats, and you couldn't hardly breathe without inhaling gnats and getting in your nose and your mouth and your eyes, and just even though they didn't bite or sting, they still were a mess.
They were a pest.
Yeah. And again, the magicians in verse 18, it said, when the magicians tried to produce gnats by their secret arts, they could not.
No.
So this is something they can't reproduce.
Gnats are a created being,
And But sure, well, frogs were too.
Well, yeah.
And somehow they were able to do frogs. Like I say, I don't know if it was supernatural powers or it may have just been sleight of hand.
Or just illusion.
Somehow, yeah, illusions like magicians do today. But anyway, even the magicians now realize this is the finger of God. This is what they say in verse, where are we at? Verse 18. It says, since the gnats, or verse 19, verse 18, the last part says, since the gnats are on people and animals everywhere. Verse 19, the magician said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God.
Yeah.
The magicians are beginning to realize now, this is not just some sleight of hand thing. This is just not Moses playing some kind of trick on us. This is God.
Yeah.
But again, Pharaoh's heart was hard. He wouldn't listen.
Wouldn't listen.
So God says, now let's, I'll send swarms of flies. Again, there's some differences in different versions. Some say biting insects, some say mosquitoes, whichever. If it's just plain house flies, I mean, that's bad enough. Can you imagine? I mean, I've lived on a farm where there were a lot of flies, and they can make your life miserable. But if they were biting flies, like horse flies, I've been bitten by horse flies before, and they don't feel too good.
No.
If it's mosquitoes, I mean, can you imagine clouds of mosquitoes?
No.
I remember one time going up to, we were going to camp up by, not Mitri Lake, but Martinez Lake. This is years ago, but anyway, we were going to camp down close to the lake in the summer, and got out and started to set up a tent, and boy, just clouds of mosquitoes coming. I mean, before you knew it, we were covered with mosquitoes. It took us about 2 minutes to pack everything up and move on.
That was the end of our camp.
Yeah, that was the end of that camp. Well, at least that trip anyway. So, you can imagine now, I mean, where there was no escape, the mosquitoes everywhere, everything, or like say, flies, whatever kind of flying insect it was, biting flies, regular flies, it's just miserable. And yet, and it says here, now I don't know about in these earlier plagues, but it says, verse 22, but on that day I will deal differently with the land of Goshen, where my people live. No swarms of flies will be there. So you will know that I, the Lord, am in this land. Now it doesn't say anything about the earlier plagues, the frogs and the gnats, if they affected the Israelites or not. I kind of have a feeling God protected them even then, but he's just mentioning it now to Pharaoh. So you see even more that it's the hand of God, because the Israelites were living in the middle of Egypt in the land of Goshen, but here's this little area. I don't know how big an area they had by this time, but there's this area of Goshen. Surrounding it is these masses of gnats and then masses of flies or mosquitoes, whatever, but you go in this one little area, and where the Israelites were, there's not a bug there.
No bugs.
That just all the more to show Pharaoh that this is my hand, this is my doing. I'll protect my people, but you're gonna suffer for it. So again, well, first of all, we see Pharaoh does begin to relent a little bit. It says, Pharaoh summoned Moses. This is verse 25 of chapter 8. Then Moses summoned Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, go, sacrifice to your God here in the land. Yeah. He says, you can go sacrifice, but you got to do it here in Egypt. You can't leave the land. Yeah. And Moses responds and he says, that wouldn't be right. The sacrifices we offer the Lord our God would be detestable to the Egyptians. Why would it be detestable to them? Well, of course, one of the things that the Israelites sacrificed were lambs, oxen, whatever, and they were worshipped by the Egyptians. They worshipped the cattle, so that would be detestable to them. It says, if we offer sacrifices that are detestable in their eyes, will they not stone us? We got to take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to get out of Egypt to offer the sacrifices as he commands us. And then he says, well, you can go, but not very far. Just outside Egypt, just a little ways. That way I can go back and get you. And, that's the way the devil works sometimes. He'll let us get just a little ways, but, close enough I can pull you back. And sometimes, even as Christians, we kind of do that. We don't get as far away from as we can from our sin. We kind of hang around it. Paul told Timothy, he said, flee from youthful lust. He didn't say kind of stay around the edges of it. He said flee from it, get away from it.
Get out of the relationship, whatever that is.
You're going to, give up smoking, get away from people that are smoking, get away from that influence. If you're trying to quit drinking, get away from that influence. Don't hang around. Don't go to the bar to visit your friends and say, well, I'll just drink soda, or I'll just, I got some booze in my house, but I'm going to test my willpower. Now just get rid of it. Get away from it. Don't hang around close because it's too easy to pull you back in. And that's exactly what Pharaoh was thinking. If they just go out, a few miles outside of Egypt, well, it won't be hard to just bring them, rope them back in again.
Or for him to go reach them. He's going to chase them.
So, anyway, Moses accepts that, says, as soon as I leave you, I'll pray, and tomorrow the flies will leave. And only be sure, only let Pharaoh be sure that he does not act deceitfully again by not letting my people go to offer sacrifices to the Lord. They prayed, the flies were all gone. What happened? Of course, he hardens his heart again. Hardens his heart and says, sorry, King's X, whatever. I didn't mean it.
Oh,
so
Pharaoh.
We've gone through what now? The plague of the blood, the plague of the
4
frogs, plague of gnats and flies. That's 4 plagues. And we'll go ahead and go into chapter 9 a little bit. Probably won't finish chapter 9, but we'll start on it. The next one is plague number 5 on livestock. He says again, let my people go. If you refuse to let them go, God will bring a plague on the livestock. But he'll make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and of Egypt. None of the livestock belonging to the Israelites will die. So the animals started dying. Again, it doesn't say what it was, what kind of a plague it was, but they all started dying. A good part of their animals died. And it says Pharaoh investigated and found that not even one of the animals of the Israelites had died. So again, he's checking things out. He's seeing now that excuse me, his animals are dying, but the Israelite animals are all healthy. Again, this should have been enough to get him to realize that it's time to get rid of these people. But once again, he doesn't. He hardens his heart. He doesn't let them go. So God says, take handfuls of soot from a furnace, throw it into the air in the presence of Pharaoh, so it'll become fine dust over the whole land of Egypt, and festering boils will break out on people. So here's number 6, boils. So they took soot from a furnace, stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it in the air, and festering boils broke out on people and animals. The magicians couldn't stand. They couldn't even stand before Moses, let alone reproduce this, because they had boils on them. And I don't know if you've ever had boils. As a teenager, I had some trouble with boils on my face. I had, for several months, had one boil after another. They're very painful. very sore. I had, it's like one at a time, but this gives the impression they had a number of them. And if you get them in certain places, it makes it hard to sit. You get them on your bottom. It makes it very difficult to sit. It's very painful. But wherever they're at, they're painful, and they last. Takes usually about 2 weeks for a boil to come to a head and begin to heal, and very, very painful. And so now they got physical afflictions, and yet again, Pharaoh refuses to let them go. Nope, sorry, not yet.
You notice here, Joe, that God says, the Lord sent a time and said, tomorrow the Lord will do this in the land. I notice that when it's talking about the livestock back here, Moses answered, as soon as I leave you, I will pray to the Lord, and tomorrow the flies will leave.
Mm-hmm.
So he's using that image that Pharaoh gave in the beginning when he wanted everything done tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Moses is carrying it out. Well, God is.
Yeah, but I think also God wants him to see that this is coming from him when he sets a time, when you say, tomorrow at 10 o'clock, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
If you said, well, sometime next week this is going to happen, well, it could be coincidence. But when you say tomorrow at 10 o'clock, this is going to happen, then you know that whoever you're speaking has got some control over it. And of course, in this case, it's God speaking. He might be speaking through Moses, but it's God.
Sure is.
And when God says something's going to happen, it happens, good or bad. So, what was that, number 6? So
That
now
was the
we're down
boils.
number 7.
Hail.
Now it's hail. Then the Lord said to Moses, get up early in the morning, confront Pharaoh, and say to him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says, let my people go so they may worship me. Keeps repeating the same thing over and over again. Let my people go. Or by this time, I will send the full force of my plagues against you and against your officials, so that you may know that there's no one like me in the earth.
Yes.
For by now I could have stretched out my hand and struck you and your peoples with a plague that would have wiped you off the face of the earth. God says, I could have just wiped you off without even in consideration. I could have just sent a plague that would have wiped every one of you out. But he said, I've given you a chance, and I'm still giving you a chance. But I've raised you up for this very purpose, so that I may show you, and I believe not only Pharaoh, but the whole earth, my power, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. See, God's got a purpose in all this. He wants people to realize there is a God that has power.
Yeah.
But he not only has power to bring plagues, but he also has power to remove plagues, as he did on these people. He has power to remove plagues on your life, things that are not going good in your life. God has the power to remove those. But God's not bringing the plagues on us now. The plagues that we go through now most of them are our own doing.
Yeah.
And in some sense, this is Pharaoh's doing too, because he refuses to let the people go like God has said. But most of our plagues, the problems that we have, are because of our disobedience to God. Now, sometimes, even when we are obedient to God, we do go through some difficulties. We go through tests. There is an enemy of our soul that will try and harass us and so forth. But he wants people to understand that he is all-powerful, and he can do what he wants to do. And he says, you still, in verse 17, speaking to Pharaoh, you still set yourself up against my people and not let them go. Therefore, at this time tomorrow, I'll send the worst hailstorm that's ever fallen on Egypt from the day it was founded till now. And he gives them an opportunity here. He says, give an order now to bring your livestock and everything you have in the field to a place of shelter. because a hail will fall on every person and animal that's not been brought in, is still out in the field, and they will die. So there'll still be a lot of damage done, but at least he says, look, tell everybody to get under shelter, get in their houses. You might get some dented roofs and your chariot might get dented up, but at least you won't be killed. But these hailstones apparently were big enough, they were killing people and animals.
Yeah.
And he says, bring them in.
Bring them in.
It says, those officials, verse 20, those officials of Pharaoh who feared the word of the Lord hurried to bring their slaves and their livestock inside. But those who ignored the word of the Lord left their slaves and livestock in the field. Even after this, there's still some of his officials that thinking, nah, this is baloney. You know, God can't do that. I don't know who this Moses is, but he's a nobody. He's not got that kind of power. So again, God tells Moses, stretch out your hand. Lightning began to strike, and thunder and hail. Lightning flashed down to the ground. The Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. Hail fell, lightning flashed back and forth. It was the worst storm in all the land of Egypt since it had become a nation.
Wow.
When God does something, he does it big. He doesn't mess around. It says, throughout Egypt, hail struck everything in the field, both people and animals. It beat down everything growing in the field, stripped every tree. The only place it didn't hail were the Israelites, were land of Goshen. Well, now Pharaoh sees he really messed up, and he summons Moses and Aaron and said, this time I've sinned. The Lord's right. I and my people are in the wrong. Pray to the Lord, for we've had enough of this thunder and hail.
Yeah.
I'll let you go. You don't have to stay any longer. Moses says, okay, I'll stop the hail, but I know that you guys still don't fear the Lord. And it just gives a footnote here. The flax and barley were destroyed since the barley was headed and the flax was in bloom, but the wheat and spelt, however, were not destroyed because they would ripen later. So all the crops that were up at that time, they were gone. The hail just tore it up. But some of the crops that hadn't come up, so they weren't totally destroyed yet. Again, soon as Moses tells God to stop the hail, Pharaoh and his officials hardened their heart and refused to let the Israelites go, just as the Lord had told Moses. So, what is this number? That's about number 7, isn't it? Yeah,
yes.
Plagues. So we got
7.
through seven plagues so far. But again, it just shows the power of God to start things, the power of God to stop things.
Yeah. And we left Pharaoh's heart harder than ever.
And God's desire not to bring plagues on people.
No.
God he allows certain things in our life just so we'll turn to him. And when I say he allows things, I think it's more we allow things in our life. We allow sin to enter in. We disobey God and don't follow his commandments, and that's what brings plagues, if you want to call them that, problems and difficulties in our lives. When we refuse to obey God. And again, that doesn't mean that we won't have any problems once we start serving God. There will be problems, but God will see us through them.
Sure
God will deliver us from those problems. And just as he delivered the Israelites after all of this time.
Yeah.
And God's on your side.
Yes, he is.
And that's something we have to remember. God is on your side. And
he's working for us.
The same God that brought all these plagues and stopped all these plagues, that very same God, the same God that rules today, he's the same God that sent Jesus to die for your sins. He's still the same God. He hadn't lost any of his power.
No.
He's not dead. He's still working in our lives, and he wants to work in your life.
That's right. And he still is a God of love.
That's right.
Because he is love.
He is love. That's right. Even, some people say, well, how could a God of love do these things? he was trying to show people that he is God.
Yeah.
And he wants you to know that he's God, and he has an answer for whatever your problem is, whatever
He does,
difficulty
Joe.
you're going through right
He
now.
does.
So we better end there, running a little bit longer than usual today, but I tell you, these Old Testament stories,
They're great.
they're not just Sunday school stories, but they're
No,
stories that relate to
no.
us today.
They're
And
for
like
purpose.
I say, it's the same God, the same powerful God that we serve today.
That's right.
So you have a good week. We'll hopefully see you next week, and
Yeah.
we'll hopefully get through the rest of these plagues and see what happens.
And come and join us Wednesday night.
Yes, we also do
Right
this
there in
live
the
on
church
Wednesday
lobby.
night, 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
Imaginations Church, 2445 East 24th Street.
Yeah,
And you're always welcome.
always.
Have a good week
Yeah.
and be blessed.
God bless.